quiet man in uniform walked into the cafe. Nobody knew what he left behind. He just left a note on the table, but that note changed everything. Before we begin this story of silence, sacrifice, and the weight of words unspoken, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. The Sunrise Cafe opened at 6 a.m. every morning, but Maria had been there since 5:30, wiping down tables and brewing the first pot of coffee. She'd owned the place for 12 years, knew every regular by name, their usual orders, their stories. But the man who walked in that Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m. was different. She'd never seen him before, yet something about him felt familiar. He wore a dress blue uniform, crisp and precise, with ribbons across his chest that caught the morning light. Not young, maybe 45, with graying temples and eyes that seemed to carry more weight than his shoulders. He moved with purpose but without urgency, the kind of measured steps that spoke of discipline earned over decades. Maria watched him from behind the counter as he chose a table in the corner, away from the windows, back to the wall. Military habit, she thought. Her own father had done the same thing until the day he died. "What can I get you, sir?" she asked, approaching with her notepad. He looked up and she saw something in his eyes she recognized, the same look her father had worn sometimes, staring at nothing, remembering everything. "Just coffee, ma'am." Black. His voice was quiet, respectful. No small talk, no weather comments, just a man who knew what he wanted and didn't need to complicate it. Maria brought the coffee and left him alone. She'd learned over the years that some people came to her cafe not for conversation, but for the opposite. For the kind of silence that only comes when you're surrounded by the gentle hum of other people's ordinary lives. The morning rush began at 7:15. Teachers grabbing coffee before school, construction workers ordering egg sandwiches, mothers with strollers navigating between tables. The usual symphony of a small town waking up. But through it all, the man in uniform sat still, barely touching his coffee, occasionally checking his watch. At 8:30, most of the crowd had cleared. That's when Maria noticed him writing. Not on a phone, not on a laptop, but with a pen on paper. Real paper. His handwriting was careful, deliberate. Every few minutes he'd pause, look toward the window, then continue. She refilled his coffee twice without being asked. He nodded his thanks each time but never spoke. There was something about his concentration, his focus, that made her feel like she was witnessing something sacred. At 9:15, he folded the paper carefully, placed it in the center of the table, and stood. He walked to the counter, placed a $20 bill next to the register, and looked at Maria directly. "Thank you for the quiet," he said. Before she could respond, he was gone. The bell above the door chimed once, and she watched through the window as he walked to a black sedan parked across the street. He didn't look back. Maria waited a few minutes before approaching his table. The coffee cup was still half full, the 20 more than enough for what he'd ordered. And there, in the center of the table, was the note. She almost didn't read it. Something about the way he'd placed it, the reverence in his movements, made her feel like she was about to invade something private. But curiosity won, and she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat, controlled. "To whoever finds this note, my name is Colonel James Mitchell. Today is my last day in uniform. After 23 years of service, I'm retiring. Not because I want to, but because I must. 3 months ago, I lost my son, Lieutenant David Mitchell, in Afghanistan. He was 24 years old. He died doing what he believed in, serving his country, protecting his fellow soldiers. The army tells me he died a hero. The flag on his coffin was folded with precision and honor. But I am writing this because I want someone to know that heroes don't just die in distant places. They live in small towns, in quiet cafes, in the ordinary moments that make up our days. David's heroism wasn't just in how he died, but in how he lived. In the letters he wrote to his younger sister, encouraging her through college. In the way he called his mother every Sunday, no matter where he was stationed. In the respect he showed to every person he met, regardless of their rank or station. I came to your cafe this morning because I needed to be somewhere normal, somewhere peaceful, before I face the ceremony that will officially end my career. I needed to remember that the world David died protecting is still here, still beautiful, still worth defending. The woman who served me coffee reminded me of my wife, kind without being intrusive, professional without being cold. She let me sit in silence when I needed it, but I could feel her caring from across the room. That's the kind of person David fought for. That's the kind of person that makes this country worth serving. I'm leaving this note because I want someone to know his name. Lieutenant David Mitchell. He loved baseball, hated Brussels sprouts, and could make anyone laugh with his impressions of cartoon characters. He was going to propose to his girlfriend, Sarah, when he came home for Christmas. The ring is still in my dresser drawer. If you're reading this, you're probably a stranger, but please know that you're part of something bigger. Every cup of coffee served with kindness, every smile shared with a stranger, every moment of ordinary decency. These are the things that make a nation worth defending. Thank you for letting me sit in your cafe. Thank you for the quiet. Thank you for being part of the world my son died protecting. Colonel James Mitchell, retired. In memory of Lieutenant David Mitchell, 1999 to 2023. Maria's hands trembled as she finished reading. She looked up, hoping to see the black sedan still there, but the street was empty. She folded the note carefully, the way he had, and held it against her chest. That evening, she showed the note to her husband, Tom. He read it twice, then looked at her with tears in his eyes. "We have to do something," he said. "What do you mean?" "I mean we can't just let this disappear. This Colonel Mitchell, his son David, people should know." Maria nodded, understanding immediately. But she also understood something else. The colonel hadn't left the note for publicity or recognition. He'd left it for connection, for the simple human need to be witnessed, to have someone else carry the weight of his grief, even if just for a moment. The next morning, Maria made a decision. She framed the note and hung it next to the cash register, along with a small American flag. But she also did something else. She placed a blank notebook on the counter with a simple sign. "For those who need to write." Word spread quietly through the town, not through social media or newspapers, but through the kind of whispered conversations that happen in small communities. People began coming to read the note, to understand the sacrifice it represented. Veterans, Gold Star families, ordinary citizens who wanted to honor the memory of a young man they'd never met. But something else happened too. People began writing in the notebook, short messages, long letters, poems, prayers, stories of their own losses, their own struggles, their own quiet heroism. The notebook filled up in 2 weeks, then another, and another. Maria learned that the colonel lived 3 towns over, in a small apartment near the Veterans Hospital. She debated calling him, writing to him, but decided against it. Some gifts are meant to be given anonymously. Some, healing happens in silence. Instead, she did something different. Every morning at 6:47 a.m., she made sure there was a fresh cup of coffee at the corner table. Not because she expected him to return, but because she wanted to honor the moment he'd shared his pain with her cafe. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning that felt exactly like the first one, he returned. This time, he wasn't in uniform. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but she recognized him immediately. The same measured steps, the same careful choice of the corner table, the same respectful nod when she approached. "Coffee, Black?" she asked. He nodded, then paused. "You remember?" "I remember everything about that morning," she said gently. He looked toward the register, saw the framed note, saw the notebook filled with pages of handwriting. His eyes widened slightly. "I hope you don't mind," Maria said quickly. I thought David deserved to be remembered." The colonel stood and walked to the counter. He read his own words, now behind glass, and then opened the notebook, page after page of responses, of stories, of people who had been touched by his honesty. One entry caught his attention. "Colonel Mitchell, you don't know me, but I want you to know that your son's name will not be forgotten. My grandfather served in Vietnam. He never talked about it, but I know he would have understood what you're going through. Thank you for sharing David with us. Sarah P." Another. "Sir, I'm a high school teacher. I read your note to my students with the cafe owner's permission. They want to start a scholarship fund in David's name, not for money or recognition, but because they believe in the things he stood for. Please let us honor his memory." And another. "I lost my son to cancer last year. He was 22. I've been angry at God, at the world, at everything. But your note helped me remember that grief shared is grief halved. Thank you for your courage in sharing your pain. A fellow father." The colonel closed the notebook, his hands steady despite the tears on his cheeks. He looked at Maria. "He would have loved this place," he said quietly. "He would have made you laugh with his Bugs Bunny impression." "Would you like to tell me about him?" Maria asked. For the first time in 3 months, Colonel James Mitchell smiled, really smiled. "He was afraid of spiders," he began. "This big, tough soldier, and he'd call me from Afghanistan asking if I thought the spiders there were dangerous. I'd tell him they were probably more afraid of him than he was of them." Maria laughed, and he continued. "He could fix anything with duct tape and determination. His mother used to say he could rebuild a car engine with nothing but YouTube videos and stubbornness. He was probably right." They talked for 2 hours. About David's baseball cards, about his terrible cooking, about the way he'd send care packages to younger soldiers who were homesick, about the letter he'd written to his sister before his final deployment, telling her she was smart enough to become a doctor if she wanted to, strong enough to change the world if she chose to. When the colonel finally left, he didn't leave a note. He didn't need to. He'd found something better than silence. He'd found someone willing to listen, to remember, to keep his son's memory alive not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of caring. The notebook continued to fill. The scholarship fund was established. Teachers began using David's story as an example of service and sacrifice, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary in the most beautiful way. Some notes are written in ink, others in tears. But the most powerful notes are the ones that transform pain into purpose, silence into connection, loss into love. Maria still keeps that corner table ready every Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m. Not because she expects the Colonel to return every week, but because she understands now that some spaces are sacred, some moments are meant to be honored, and some stories are too important to forget. The Colonel does return, not every week, but often enough. Sometimes he writes in the notebook. Sometimes he just sits with his coffee, watching the morning rush, remembering his son. And sometimes he talks to the other customers, sharing David's story with anyone who will listen. Because that's what heroes do. They don't just sacrifice in dramatic moments. They keep showing up, keep caring, keep fighting for a world worth defending, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. The Sunrise Cafe is still there, still opening at 6 a.m., still serving coffee to anyone who needs it. The notebook is still on the counter, still collecting stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And the note is still framed by the register, still reminding everyone who sees it that heroism isn't just about how we die, but about how we live. And every morning, when Maria makes that first pot of coffee, she thinks about Lieutenant David Mitchell, who loved baseball and hated Brussels sprouts, and who died protecting the kind of world where strangers can become family over a cup of coffee and a shared story. That's the thing about real heroes. They don't just save the day. They save the small moments, the quiet connections, the ordinary kindness that makes life worth living. They leave notes that change everything, not because they're famous, but because they're human. So now I ask you, have you ever found a note that changed your perspective? Have you ever met someone who carried their grief with grace, who turned their pain into purpose? Share their story in the comments. Let us know who they were, what they meant, how they changed your world. Because at Echoes of the Quiet, we believe that the most powerful stories don't shout for attention. They wait quietly in corner cafes, in folded notes, in the memories of those who were wise enough to listen. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, subscribe, share, and help us keep these voices alive. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, if you ever see someone sitting alone, writing quietly, remember that they might be sharing something sacred. They might be leaving a note that changes everything. Some notes are written in ink, others in tears.